Welcome to the Masterclass Series facilitated by the UC MBA program and Executive Education. Today we're talking strategy and we're talking to Kendall Langston from Pivot and Pace. Kendall's also on the MBA advisory board. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm a Cantabrian, born and bred. I've sort of been lucky enough to work all around the country and around the world. My background, obviously I went to university. I was a graduate of Canterbury University. But I had a long career in the Army as an Army officer, which sort of, I guess, taught me early about leadership, and so I've considered myself to be a professional leader for well over 30 years. I was lucky enough to have a bit of operational experience and work in many parts of the world with the Army, and subsequently, since about 2004, I've been out in the business world. I've been a CEO and in the construction industry. And latterly been working in the professional services space, so strategist, a focus certainly in our business on strategy execution, which is the challenging piece, and around coaching executives, so CEOs. I personally coach some professional directors, CEOs, execs, so that's sort of my background in business. Recent years I've been as an independent director on a number of boards. I hold a number of directorships, but very much around leadership and around getting things done. That's what I'm passionate about, making an impact and helping good leaders to get better.
What does strategy mean to you?
Strategy to me is, well, it's a big topic, but particularly it means about shortening the odds in my mind. You know, there's many ways you can achieve something. Strategy is about quite intentionally choosing how you're going to achieve an outcome in the future.
That sounds like it's a little bit more about implementation than it is about that one pager that you create.
Well, I guess one thing, you know, what I do know about strategy is it's the easy part, coming up with a plan, and as long as it's continually reviewed, you know, we're in a dynamic environment in a market or in a business or whatever way you cut it. So that review of strategy keeps it relevant, and that's the easy bit. The hard bit is definitely around implementing or executing that strategy, and in fact it's the biggest challenge in my view that business leaders have today.
What is so difficult about implementing strategy?
Well, it's about change, and it tends to be, strategy is about shortening the odds of success in the future. So in amongst business as usual, there's a lot of pressure at the moment for CEOs and exec teams to deliver change and profit and growth. Now, you know, if we roll back a few years, we had change leader or change project experts or change consultants would come in, or you would actually hire someone that specialised in that. Now it's just the day-to-day. Change is just so constant. And so to then be able to look over the next horizon and do a little bit now, that's the challenge.
And are those almost contradictory sometimes, that kind of focus on change and focus on profit at the same time?
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
It is a real challenge. And, you know, I've been working, I guess, across many businesses for the last sort of 12, 13 years, and what I've seen is that complexity and the wave of change just ramp up. There's never been a more challenging time to be leading in business or people, and I think the next 5 or 10 years we're going to see that accelerate again.
Really? Accelerate? Aren't things going to calm down?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the market factors at the moment. You know, there's the geopolitical change, there's the technology impacts, there's the workforce changes, whether it's been dispersed or there's the impact of COVID. There's a whole lot of things. There's many, and these are not new trends, but they've sort of converged and arrived in a couple of year period.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think was it Oxford Dictionary word of the year this year is permacrisis.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, I guess I sort of like to use the term, the saying that the role of a leader is to disrupt business as usual in a good way. And I guess when we look at strategy, once you've got a plan, and I can talk a little bit about how you might land at that and the sort of cadence to do that, but a leader's role is to sort of disrupt that busyness of the daily churn to look over that, do a little bit now to look over into Horizon 2. So, what I mean by that is a strategic plan really should start with Horizon 3. So that's where 10 years plus, where do you want to take the organisation? So start with the end in mind, and then once you've sort of got that aligned view, and it is an aligned process because a lot can happen, and you've got to, annually you should just check in with that.
Yeah.
But that allows you to anchor your midterm strategy to those big rocks, if you like.
Yeah.
A few years ago, you would sort of look in the 3 to 5 year space. Now, our strategy, even in big companies, is in that 2 to 3 year space because there's so much happening. So it's just outside your annual, which people are more comfortable with. But, it's spending about 10% of your time moving forward the things that are going to make you successful in the future.
And we get so busy just doing the busy work of today. So I think being, implicit with that kind of leadership focus. And I think when you and I spoke about this, what are the key factors of successful implementation? You said leadership is key.
Yeah, leadership is it's all about behavioural leadership and people. People hate change. I mean, I personally like change, but everyone has a tolerance, and like everybody else right now, you get to a point where it gets saturated. There's so much change going on, so you've actually got to have some frameworks and methodologies to work through that. And I guess that's why I like that. I like the term pracademic, where you take the real world of business and you bash it with the academic world, where you've got good, robust research and frameworks and methodology, and I truly believe the magic happens in that space where you bash those two worlds together.
Well, the UCMBA believes that too, right?
I know that.
We have academics and industry leads on each and every course because that's where real learning takes place. Only when you can make those academic frameworks and theories really relevant.
Yeah.
Not 10 years from now, tomorrow, and people can use that.
Yeah.
So implementation is about leadership and for leaders realizing that strategy is a key part of their business and what that strategy. Yeah. The second one is leading change.
Yes.
What's next?
Well, there's a whole range of things. I mean, I think, having the plan, and then there's the culture and the whole sort of priority of that team implementing it, starting at the top. I mean, it starts at the top. If a board makes the strategic agenda number one, as it should, I mean, there's compliance and there's other roles of governance, but the strategic agenda then brings a spotlight on it for the management team, and that should be elevated ahead of business as usual. Now that's a real challenge. You can't do that all the time because when things are in crisis or there's big changes, you've got to address the immediate to keep us on track for our immediate operational plan. But you must disrupt it or you just never get to it. So one of the big things comes around cadence or rhythm in the business of how do you focus on it? Is it part of every meeting at the senior level and then right through the business? Updates, people's parts and strategic projects, is it being measured, and are there regular reviews? And when I talk about that, disrupting business as usual, the biggest way to disrupt is through your meeting rhythm. Like most of the companies that we work with would annually review their strategy and every quarter reset them. So if they've got a 10-year vision or 10-year plus, you've got 40 or 50 quarters to deliver it. And so every quarter, just by having that deadline, power of a deadline, to come back and review, to go, what did we achieve? Did we take on too much? Why didn't we hit it? And that just challenges them, bank the lessons learned, reset. And that drives that cadence through the business.
And I think one of the key things I've learned from you as well, as part of your advisory board role on the MBA program, is that how much you actually need to focus on within the strategy. Sometimes if we hear the word, 10-year plan, and this is where we want to get, etc., you think, oh, I need to achieve everything at the same time. And how do you go about prioritizing that? And do you have some good stories of that?
Oh, look, there's some massive success stories just around that. The magic happens. If I just talk to the 10-year, most people struggle with that 10-year plus, but many companies, once they get used to that level of thinking, can push out, because once you get to 10 years, it could be 15 or 20, because we're talking the what does it look like rather than the how, and that allows us to come back into the how, which is a bit more comfortable. But you know, some good story. Well, I mean, there's a whole range of stories with companies we've worked with, and I'll protect identities, but I can think of one in particular, Christchurch-based, subsequently acquired by another company. But they set out, and they were in the professional, in the health services, so professionals, and they were looking. They set a goal to be South Island wide. At that stage, they had one practice in Christchurch, and there was great debate at the board level and within the exec team. That's even where they wanted to go, because these were, you know, professionals in the medical industry. Well, roll forward 3 years, they had 20 plus practices across the South Island, and a couple of years later, they were acquired and exited out, you know, in the ownership of it. But, you know, that was a 10-year vision they achieved in 3. And I guess they sort of, just by setting that, they started to explore the what could be, what do we need, and they actually found there was a real opportunity to roll up some others. And if they hadn't done that, they probably would never have gone past 1 or 2, you know, 2 or 3.
So it's less about that document being shackles, and it's more about being deliberate.
It's about being intentional, it's about focusing on it, and I think it's about exploring and being, you know, insanely curious. Because often, you know, and we all do that, we come through in an area that we specialise in, and with the MBA, you know, that's the broadening of the role. And, you know, you have to start exploring, well, what would different skill sets look like in the business? How would we pull that together? How would we go to market with that? And so once you start learning that and you start exploring it and you start partnering, and the other thing is most of the stuff's been done. And if you know, most people will share it. So if you're not competing directly, you know, people are very generous with their time. Go and hang out with them and copy or replicate what they've learned. And I think, you know, that curiosity and the lifelong learning bit as a leader is absolutely critical, because you've got to unlearn and learn. And you don't need to learn by making all the mistakes. You learn through others, lead through others.
Yeah, and I suppose it's also about creating those networks of being able to see best practice across different businesses. I mean, that's definitely part of what we try and do, but you also have other opportunities through professional bodies, just through your own personal network, through executive education.
Another example would be in the primary industry, a company we work with, a national company. And I guess with the compliance coming through and the changes around, you know, food and the way animals need to be treated, and they knew there was a wave of change coming, and then when COVID came in, there was such an opportunity to advance their vision of getting ahead of that. And so by coming together sort of, quarterly for a couple of days, like doing quite an extended deep dive across their board, across their management team and some of their wider leaders in the business, bringing externals, exploring, they were able to get well ahead of that curve, you know, and arguably ahead of many of the competitors who will be forced as legislation comes through or as the market shifts again. They've already sort of future-proofed their business and are looking over the next horizon. So, you know, there's some real advantages in doing that, and, you know, you would use the term don't waste a good crisis, but, you know, I guess it's when you have change, use it to actually quite intentionally get ahead of it rather than just survive. So that's that thrive piece.
And do you find, I mean, the flip side of that is almost procrastinating. So using your busyness as an excuse as a leader and just saying, well, we know that there's this uncertainty in the market now and just this perma-crisis, and there might be disruption coming along the way. How much of that side do you see people just procrastinating in that important role that they need to play as leaders?
Well, it's quite interesting. The sort of client companies and the brands that we work with, we don't do startups and we don't do turnarounds. So we're working with good, medium-sized, typically privately held. We do a little bit of government, but they're quite intentionally wanting to get better. So they don't necessarily need to change. So they've got a mindset, and I think mindset is critical. They're looking, they're curious, and they're going, well, where can we take this thing? So somewhere, and it'll be a leader, you know, one of the who's starting to drive that, and then, you know, and some of those cultures are just endemic in those businesses. They're always wanting to get better and better. And so there's the better and better at core business around efficiencies. There's the better at some of the functional areas, like at sales and better at using technology or automation. But then there's that piece around getting better around strategy and around leadership and how do we drive people. But procrastination is the number one. I personally hate it. I mean, in the Western world, we have this, when you meet someone, you've got to have a discussion about how busy you are.
Yes.
Like I'm busy and you're busier than me. And once you get that out of the way, you can always get on with. But try having a conversation where you just say, actually, it's been pretty quiet. Like, there's literally this, and so this is, I guess, that thrive, not survive.
Yes.
And I hate that. I just think we can be so much better than that as a professional leader, where it's not about you should survive in all situations, but how do you thrive in it? Now, that's hard, and we all have various levels of that, and I don't claim to know all the answers, but if you're quite intentional and you're curious and you employ smart people and you hang out with smart people and you study and you look at research, there's generally a way through, or a better way, or a different way you can try.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other one is reflection. Those learning organisations and leaders need to be reflectors. So learn from their mistakes, adjust quickly, fail fast, all those good words, but in reality, that's hard to do. That's that human nature. So that's why I say strategy, and its most important piece, execution or implementation, is all about behavioural leadership and leaders.
And you guys talk to a lot of people all the time. And what do you find is the number one thing that companies at the moment are concerned with here in New Zealand?
Oh, there's many things. Like I said, leaders are tired. It's 3 years into this shift we're in, and I think it's going to be long term. So there's an element of learning how to it's a marathon. It's not a sprint,
Yeah.
And so there's that piece that they just about every organisation we work with, and we do regular updates across all our clients. We get the consulting team and we go, well, what are we seeing? Because the first question, and we typically, even not being asked to do it, we'll start with, this is what we're seeing in the market. Because that's the number one question. How are others dealing with this?
Yeah.
And I guess that's that generalist level, regardless of industry. How are other CEOs leading? How are other ops managers? How are other boards? And you can give some insights, which gives a little bit of confidence they might be on the right track, or it just gives them some other things to think about.
At the beginning of today's talk, Kendall promised us to talk a little bit about how to thrive in a tighter market, and what are the strategy decisions and considerations that we need to have?
I think they're more principles, and I guess they're not mine. They're good business thinking, I think. First and foremost is getting your strategy right, so reviewing it, having a good look at it, adjusting it to the change in the market. So that the way you look at it, what are the emerging things, what are our competitors doing, what's happening politically, economically, socially, some good typical frameworks, but really distilling that down and challenging into a tighter market, do we need to adjust? So first thing is getting the strategy right, and I always say, data wins arguments. It doesn't lie. So if you can bring data to it to validate people's opinions and thinking, it's a time to do that in a tougher market. Secondly is around right-sizing the business, and that doesn't mean redundancy, which people rush to, but it means, I think, more about the disciplines, and even the most disciplined companies get a little bit, I wouldn't say loose, but they employ people, job descriptions evolve, they get out of date, and it's a time to get clear who's responsible for what, so you have less overlap, so you can move faster, and you don't have the double up. So it's right-sizing the business, get the structure right, get your job descriptions, have another look at your KPIs around, how we're going to measure success in a tougher market. The other one is tightening cash. Now, there's no surprises there. Every accountant in the world will, recommend that, but really the disciplines around it, getting your invoices out on time. It's amazing sort of how loose that can be, even in good companies. It's about having good cut-off deadlines, following up debtors and getting cash in, and doing good cash flow forecasting, because a lot of that stress, you can see the holes coming and you can adjust. So, That's common sense, but often if you just tighten that, it can make a huge impact. Be close to your clients, existing clients, make sure you retain them, be close to them, to understand the market and what they're dealing with and how you can adjust, but also to solve more of their problems. And that's where you're probably going to, get more revenues and make sales with those tight clients, and work really hard for new business. So, it's going to be harder to get that in a tougher market. So all those disciplines around sales and when you get them, work hard for it.
Yeah.
And the last one is tighten your team, celebrate success, invest in your culture, invest in your people, bank the wins, hold people to what they say they'll do. But just, make sure there's downtime, because it can be, that's why I always say celebrating the wins is so important, because it can be quite negative, if you're always up against it and that managing that tempo. So the culture in the team, it's a time to really look after your people.
Yeah, and I find in tighter times, people hold on to information. It's just what we do. And actually, when there's so much uncertainty, maybe in the market, but also within your organization, what are we going to do to just be really intentional with your communication to staff and making sure that you taking people along with the key decisions that you're making. I think that's really important.
And the best companies, that's the time they grow market share.
Yeah.
You get you pull the levers that gets the back to core business. The appetite for risk might change depending on the board or where the company's at in the cycle. But if you do that well, as the market grows again, you'll grow market share.
Yeah.
And so, it's that different cycle. And the companies that we work with have been through many of these. Like most of them are well-known brands, and they've been through 3 or 4 or 5, some of them are 50, 60, 70 years old. We've got companies that are 100 years old. It's about reminding them what they've learned.
Yeah.
So sometimes pulling a senior team, even the board, together and go, well, what did you learn in 2008, 2009 in the global recession? And as painful as it might be, just pulling that out and go, well, how can we get ahead of it? We don't know how long or deep, the tighter market might be.
Yes.
Will it be a recession? I mean, we're hearing some of that in the market now. But just bank those learnings, and it gives you the confidence the organisation will come through.
And I think, like you said, focusing almost on the hierarchy of needs of the organization, and at the bottom is sales and marketing, and making sure that you know what the job is that you're doing for your client, and just buckling down on that job and just doing that really well.
Solve their problems.
Solve their problem for them, and then look at the profitability model around it, like you said, tightening the business, etc. And then you can get back to those more kind of existential and really those bigger questions, but really buckling down on that foundation of the business.
It is definitely about looking ahead and shortening the odds, and in a really dynamic environment, you've got to look ahead more often. So one of the other things around a tight market is review strategy more, because the tendency is to do less because you're busy or you're head down in the business, but you actually want to do it more because you need to be scanning more, bringing insights back. But the framework that you choose to use, and there are many, and you can use but I believe in being consistent, bringing the outside voice in. So if you can bring external voices into the room to challenge ideas, to present data, and much of it can be online or you don't necessarily need to pay people to come into the room, but having different people in the room during strategic thinking shifts the conversation, and it shifts dynamics. And you want that different mindset or thinking, off-site or however you do it. Have a good framework and have a good regular review where annually you want to throw it in the air, like challenge it to death. And then be tight. Are we on track? Are we executing? Has the situation changed? Because you might have to review it early, and I've seen that before.
Well, do you have a story of where that diversity of voice really changed the narrative?
Yeah, I one that comes to mind is I was working with a client in Wellington actually, and it was just after the Christchurch earthquake, so like 2 or 3 years, where we sort of been through it, where everyone was out of business and everybody was sort of, how do we get business continuity? But our client up there, they were manufacturing, and they had on their medium term, they want a purpose-built factory, and they want it highly automated. and the factory caught fire. In fact, it was a really prominent fire. There were many firefighters and one got seriously hurt in it. But long story short there, the owners of that business were isolated. They were the only ones, the factory, they were out of business, whereas we'd sort of been through it. And I was able to just bring the insight that actually we pull forward your medium-term desire to have a purpose-built factory because you're about to have one.
Yes.
And now they have, it's highly automated. But at the time it was just supporting that business leadership team just to get the head around it. It was pretty tough at the time.
Well, it's funny you mention this because the more I read about leadership and the importance of staying calm in different situations, the more it is about how you rephrase those knocks in life and how you just rephrase those challenges and threats into opportunities and that being such a core part of just staying calm in these situations, looking forward, not looking down necessarily, and just pushing through.
Yeah, I learned that as an infantry officer in the army is, in business it plays out, choose how you react.
Yeah.
And we're always taught, no matter what happens, just remain calm, think it through, and it's generally not the first decision you make, it'll be the second or third that gets people killed or is a serious mistake. So too in business.
Yeah.
And people want their leaders just to, hey, okay, yeah, it's not good, let's just keep calm and think it through.
We've spoken about how uncertain times are now and we're just prone to disruption. So how do we build that flexibility and agility into those strategic plans?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of big ways in fact. The first thing is around in the medium term when you develop your strategy, have moves. They're not actionless, and often we get confronted with a plan that might have been developed elsewhere and a company wants an implementation plan. And there'll be this list of 20 good ideas. And so I guess when you're doing true strategy, you are coming up with chunky moves, or this is where we need to be. This is, to be in 2 or more locations. You're not saying it's 3 or 5, but you're saying it's more than, and so how you then do that, you offer the team leading that, or the team, they've got options. It's not the tactic to get there. So that would be the first thing in the medium term. In the 1 years, you want some yes, no's, done actions. So that medium term, the 3 chunky moves, and I say 3 because there's the law of diminishing returns. We know that if you have 1, 2 or 3 priorities, you'll hit them. If you have 4, you'll probably hit 1, and if you have 5 or more, you'll get none.
Yeah.
So the power of 3. And that requires clarity. There'll always be 20, but good leaders get that clarity. And they can achieve more, but these are the 3 we're setting out to do. So that would be have a move, not a tactic they have to do, because that's too rigid. And the other one is regularly review it. If you're reviewing it every quarter or as required if something big happens, and throwing the whole plan in the year annually, you truly do have some agility.
Yeah, and I think what's really important, what you said now, is those chunky moves also mean that you and your team create a vision around it, but you have your team implement it essentially, and that brings people along with the change. It's not top-down enforced, but you just have that clear vision of where you want to go.
And the good team, the rule is sort of, you want to have about 10-20% of your time in reflection, and generally the government forces us to do our annual accounts. That's what the bulk of companies do. But if you're actually reviewing big decisions quarterly, annually, you get those insights and the lessons learned.
What does that practically look like? 10 to 20% time for reflection. Is that a meeting? Is that you sitting in the garden,
it's a mix of all those things. And just like 10% of your time should be spent on execution of your strategic priorities, which is about half a day. Now, most companies would not invest half a day of all their key people on the Horizon 2 or the future success of the business. They would do, it's all, today.
Yeah.
And so that's a real discipline. That's why I say leaders disrupt business as usual. How do you do that? meetings, meeting agendas. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a great practical tip going forward, is building in those key times where you really are focusing on those different horizons, on reviewing and reflecting. Thank you. I'm going to do that now.